right. Well, hello, I'm Stephanie Mace, Associate State Director of Advocacy and Outreach with AARP Texas. Thank you for joining us today as we provide an update on what the legislature is discussing in the area of electricity. We know that access to affordable and reliable electricity is crucial, yet about 40% of Texas households struggle to afford their monthly electricity bills. Affordability is especially vital for older adults many of whom are on fixed incomes. When energy prices are high, some cannot cool or heat their homes, especially for older adults. Exposure to harsh temperatures can lead to adverse health outcomes and worsening of chronic conditions. I'm excited today to host Doug Lewin as my guest. Doug is a nationally recognized energy expert. He is the president of Stoic Energy, which is an advisory firm that provides insights on energy markets, technology, and policy. He is the author of the Texas Energy and Power newsletter, and he hosts the Energy Capital podcast, which I love listening to and listened to quite a few episodes this week preparing for this conversation. Welcome and thank you for joining me, Doug.
Thanks so much for having me, Stephanie. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Doug, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the area of energy?
Yeah, I actually started as a staffer at the legislature. It was 2005 to 2009, which was a really interesting time to be cutting my teeth on energy policy. It was a time when, during that period, Texas expanded its renewable portfolio standard. It expanded its energy efficiency standard. It expanded transmission. The Governor Perry, who I had on the podcast recently, had fast-tracked 11 coal plants. Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore came out at the same time. So like climate change awareness was just kind of dawning. It was like all, and you had two presidential candidates both running with pretty robust climate platforms, right? Both Barack Obama and John McCain back then. So it was just a really interesting time. I got bit by the bug. I've been involved in energy policy ever since. I led a nonprofit focused on energy efficiency. I won't run through the whole bio, but 20 years of doing Texas energy, environment, and climate work within the state of Texas primarily.
Great. Very interesting. I know I am new to this energy space, and you have been so helpful, and really appreciate your historical knowledge and how you're really able to break down kind of these complex issues. And so I'm excited that you're on here today. And so with that, let's start by just kind of talking about, let's set the stage for the listeners. Can you provide a high level status report on the electricity grid? It's been 3 years since Winter Storm Uri.
Four and a half. Yeah.
Okay. So it's still been top of mind. But what are some of the other big things in the grid space that consumers should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, Winter Storm Uri is obviously one of the, if it's not the very first thing somebody talks about when they're talking about the Texas grid, it's in the top 2 or 3, right? It was really kind of a very pivotal moment. Obviously, was traumatic to just about everybody in the state. Several hundred Texans lost their lives, over $100 billion in damage from all the freezing pipes and all the rest. So I don't probably need to rehash too much of that. I think everybody's familiar, but suffice it to say there were some major changes made after that, and those changes continue to be implemented, and we could certainly talk about that. I think right now, like the biggest thing that everybody talks about related to the Texas grid, Texas energy issues is really load growth. Basically what is going on right now, Stephanie, is we are right now, like a lot of times in these conversations, people are talking about this is a future thing because AI data centers are really starting to come, and they require massive amounts of power. Some of them, there are individual data centers. There's one under construction right now in Abilene that will require more power than the city of Waco or the city of Lubbock. Just one, and they're going to build 4 of these things on the same site. This is Project Stargate, which has gotten a lot of attention. But a lot of times it's talked about as a futuristic thing. Over the last 4 years, Texas annual growth rate is about 5.5%. We haven't seen that kind of growth rate in over 50 years. And it's only 3 or 4 years. It's a small sample size, but it looks like it's actually going to go up from there. And we may reach annual growth rates on the electricity grid. ERCOT is forecasting this of 9 to 10%, which would be equal to or even a little bit greater than the growth rates when we were just beginning to get air conditioning in the state in the late 50s and 60s.
Wow.
So that is really kind of flavoring a whole lot of discussions, right? As you might imagine, it's pretty challenging to keep up with that kind of growth for the industry and stakeholders and for ERCOT policymakers. I'll mention just one other thing, and then there's certainly others, but I'll just put one more on the table. Just a very different resource mix now than what we had 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. 5 years, go back to Winter Storm Uri. The time of Winter Storm Uri, we had about 5,000 or 6,000 megawatts of solar power. We're over 30,000 now. So literally a 5x increase in the space of 4 years. Battery energy storage. Batteries are just so useful to the grid. They solve a multitude of problems. At the time of Winter Storm Uri, we only had 200 megawatts. We're now over 11,000. So that's more than a 50x increase in batteries in the space of 4 years. So those new resources are really changing the way the grid works in really significant ways, and also enabling that kind of robust demand growth. We didn't have any conservation calls last summer in Texas, largely because we had so much solar, even though it was a very hot summer. So those were a couple of things going on. There's obviously many more, but I can stop there.
No, I think that's a great overview. And I'm glad you did throw in the conservation alerts, because I remember, was it the winter or the summer before, there were quite a few conservation alerts, and there was just a lot of confusion about what it meant for consumers. And so as we think about the growing demand, making sure that residential customers have adequate access to electricity, and the cost, I think is key to us. So now let's transition to, we're in an odd number year, which means that the legislature is meeting. They meet for 140 days. We're getting closer to the end of session, but there's still enough time for the legislature to move some key bills. And I think this session, there were more than 10,000 bills filed, which is the largest ever, and a good number, I think about 150 bills were energy bills. So a good number, and just kind of wanted to get your thoughts. What are some key themes, since you are familiar with what the legislature has done? Are a lot of the bills that you've seen to address kind of the large load that you've talked about and the increasing demand, kind of paint a picture of how things are going?
Yeah. And that 150 or so energy bills you cite, I don't know if that number is too low, or it just seems to me like there's thousands of energy bills right now, because I'm trying to track and keep track of all this stuff. And my I don't know, I feel dizzy sometimes. There's a lot. I think first of all, probably the bills that I think are most concerning there is this sort of and I'll spare you the bill numbers. Anybody that wants to get into this and really track it can go check out my newsletter, and I've got all the numbers. But I start throwing numbers around, I'll confuse you, dear listener, and probably myself at the same time. But there's this group of bills that are really meant to restrict renewable energy development. I'll mention just a couple of them. Senate Bill 819 is one of those. Senate Bill 388 is one of those. Senate Bill 715. Those are sort of the three biggest. Some of them have House companions as well. But these bills in different ways are just trying to basically restrict renewable energy development. And there's different motivations and reasons, and these bills are a little different in their particulars. But I think the most important thing here is that we do have this load growth right now. I'll just a quick anecdote, Stephanie, in the governor's State of the State address, which he gives every other year at the beginning of the legislative session. He said that in the last 4 years, we have added 35% to our supply and of electricity, of power sources. And when I heard that, I was like, that's interesting. I haven't actually seen that number anywhere. And I went and, looked it up, sort of went through some of the ERCOT stats. I was like, sure enough, it's about a 35% increase. Of that 35%, 92% is wind, solar, and storage. And about, about 10, 15, it's more like 15 or 20% of that is storage. So about 75% is wind and solar. And they're challenging resources to integrate because obviously they're intermittent, they're variable, they don't produce all the time. But challenging doesn't mean you stop it. Challenging means you meet the challenge, right? These are particularly for consumers. These are really vital energy sources because they have zero fuel cost, right? If you think about it, your solar panels or your wind turbines, you're not having to buy gas or coal or uranium or whatever the input is. It is a zero marginal fuel cost. So that means that it lowers prices. And there's different estimates of this, but I think probably the best one comes from researchers at the University of Texas, Dr. Josh Rhodes and his team, that over the last 10 years, that's been a savings of over $20 billion to consumers. And so if you restrict that growth of renewables in a major way, as all of those bills, that would be the outcome, at least in their present forms, then you are basically artificially increasing the cost. And this sort of segues from or connects rather to what I was talking about earlier. You would be doing that at a time where we're experiencing really large load growth, and you really can't actually get gas turbines right now. There's a real rush on buying gas turbines because of this AI data center growth. So if you haven't already bought one and sort of have a line of sight or a contract for one, you're not going to get one for 5 years. So really what these bills would do is not only drive up consumer costs, but restrict the economic growth of the state. So unfortunately, that is the biggest issue facing like an electricity policy right now. I wish I could tell you that wasn't happening in like HB 14, which would bring on new nuclear sources or any number of the different bills to support geothermal or energy efficiency or distributed batteries, backup power. There's so many good bills out there right now that would actually strengthen the grid, but they're kind of all getting drowned out by these bills that would really just be, I can't emphasize it enough, catastrophic for the state's grid, for consumers, and for the economic growth of the state.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Well, I do want to say that AARP, we are energy agnostic, right? So we don't generally have a stance on any type of one type of energy over another. But I think what you've really focused on is this is really about strengthening the grid and ensuring that we have adequate energy looking forward and ahead, and anything to do to curb kind of the electricity would be harmful to consumers and to our state and to our grid. So that's it. Great. So you talked about restricting renewables, kind of strengthening the grid. Are there any other themes that you kind of want to talk about? What about kind of the large load, the data centers? What is the legislature doing to address that area?
Yeah, there's two major bills that would address those. After I said I wasn't going to say bill numbers, now I'm saying bill numbers right and left.
Okay.
House Bill 3970 and Senate Bill 6 are probably the two biggest ones. Both have passed their respective chambers, and so now we're kind of entering the phase where there will be some negotiations around that. And ultimately, I think what I'm hopeful will come out of those bills, Stephanie, is really a system that incentivizes flexibility from these large loads. And I think there's multiple ways to go about doing that. And I don't think there's any like one way. I don't think anybody's sort of like cracked the code on this yet, but I think that these bills provide the potential to create a framework whereby if you're a large load, so I actually recorded a podcast with a researcher from Duke University. His name's Tyler Norris. He did this study that said if these very large data centers could be flexible in 1% of their hours out of the year, and it doesn't even have to be like turn off for 1%. It could be throttled down to 50% of your max power draw for 2%, right? However that works out, just 1% of the total of their energy use in a given year can be shifted, then we could add 15,000 megawatts of data centers without any new supply. And 15,000 megawatts, to put that in perspective, like the center point, which is the utility for the entire Houston area, not the entire Houston area, the vast majority of the Houston area is about a 20,000 megawatt peak. So you're talking about like accommodating another, 3/4 of a Houston just by having 1% of the hours be flexible. So these bills are contemplating sort of how to get into place. Really, 3970 does this more than Senate Bill 6, but how to incentivize these resources to be flexible so that we can continue to grow the economy, locate these data centers here. There's real national security implications for that. I do believe we need to have these data centers on American soil, but you have to have power. That is like a major limiting factor. And there's just not a lot of places in the United States that can accommodate them. But as the governor said in his State of the State, we added 35%, to our power supply in the last 4 years. No place else in the country comes close to that. And as long as we don't have bills that restrict renewables, we could add another 35% in the next 4 years. We could add more than that. And if these data centers are flexible, and this is probably the key point, Stephanie, we all benefit from that too, because then that can actually make the grid more resilient and strong. And I'm actually hopeful. I've started talking about this more and more. I'm not sure it's going to get traction in any of these bills, but this might be important to a lot of AARP members. So ERCOT's really exploring residential demand response, right? So we have what demand response is basically what I'm talking about, that load flexibility. A large user in the state of Texas can get paid to reduce their use when electricity prices are high because it's scarce, because supply and demand lines are getting close. There's very limited opportunities for residential and small commercial customers to participate. ERCOT, the grid operator, has made residential demand response a top, maybe not the top, but a top priority for 2025. And I'm hopeful that as these data centers start to come, some of them won't have as much flexibility. Say you're a data center that is providing services to autonomous vehicles, right? And as the vehicle sees an octagon, it's got to process in real time. That's a stop sign, right? There's no load flexibility there. If you're a data center supporting a 911 call center or, military operations or something like that, like there's no flexibility there. Yeah. But those kinds of data centers could potentially pay into a fund to help residential customers reduce their load, save on their bills, actually incentivize the smart thermostats and other kinds of equipment that would make that possible. And I think there's really something there where they could flex, reduce their own load. And when that's not possible, or even when it is, help to broaden the availability of payments for residential customers. As you mentioned in the outset, Stephanie, 40%, that number fluctuates depending on the latest census, data. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but let's call it 40% of Texans are choosing between paying for their power bill, their medicine, and their food. That's unconscionable and can be fixed. We can make power more affordable. And one way to do that is to pay folks who are willing to participate in these flexibility and demand response programs.
Well, I think that's a great idea. And you really highlighted a key thing that we keep going back to, right, is the cost of somebody's electricity. Can you kind of connect the dots? I mean, I think the demand response is a key one that AARP is interested in. And I think our viewers and others are really interested in, because it does impact, your cost if you're able to reduce your cost. But what are some of the other things that you've talked about and other bills that you think will impact customers' electricity bills? What are some of the things that we need to either watch out for because they're pushing the cost even more to residential consumers, or where, I think you've already kind of mentioned a great one, where customers could benefit from some savings?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. So again, not to sound like a broken record here, but I do think like the first and foremost thing is if some of these anti-energy bills do pass, we will see very large increases in electric bills. So I can't emphasize that enough. I think that is the most important issue related to energy. Unfortunately, again, unfortunately, I think it's, a distraction, and we could be focused on a lot of other things. There are bills related to energy efficiency. Texas is number one in oil production. We are number one in gas production. We are number one in utility scale solar, number one in wind, number two in batteries, might be number one end of this year, early next year. We are number 36 in energy efficiency. We are getting trounced by Arkansas and Oklahoma. And any Texan should be, embarrassed by that, right? There is no competition where we should be okay getting beat by our neighbors to the north. And so that is an area that the legislature really could make a big difference. And there are some bills related to that. There again, if what folks are wanting to do is make the grid more reliable, there is like literally nothing that is more important than energy efficiency, particularly focused on winter peaks. Because winter peaks, like summer peaks, are difficult, but they usually, we have so much solar during the middle of the day now that, again, we didn't have any conservation calls last summer, even though it was the sixth hottest summer on record. And when the sun goes down, batteries are really well suited, demand response as well, to handle an hour or two gap. In the wintertime, when it gets really cold, it stays that way typically through the night, right? And through those sort of morning peak periods. And so you have these 12, 14, 16-hour periods that batteries are not, batteries help, no doubt, like a couple hours, 4 hours, even some batteries are even going 6 or 8, but you really need to bring the overall load down. So that's a big thing for grid reliability. And if you make those kinds of changes, customer bills go down dramatically, because when it's really the heating and cooling system that when, anybody who's listening right now and you're upset because you got a $300 or $400 or $500 bill in the summer or the winter time, your utility probably has some efficiency programs. You should look into that. There are incentives to make your home more efficient. They just are very small energy efficiency programs. So that's one I would look at. I'll just mention one more, Stephanie, because it's actually within Senate Bill 6. I can't remember if House Bill 3970 has it as well. These are the bills we were talking about a minute ago that deal with large loads, is changing the way that we allocate transmission costs. This gets a little wonky, but the sort of like simple version of it is very large users have the ability to, through demand response, basically lower their transmission bill significantly, sometimes all the way down to zero. And residential customers do not have that ability. So it ends up causing a cost shift where all of us as residential and even small commercial customers are effectively paying a portion of the really large users' bills. And just to put a finer point on this, over the last 3-4 years, think of all the inflation that's happened. Nobody is, I don't think, unmindful of all the inflation that's gone on the last few years at this point. Industrial bills have gone up 2% over the space of 3 or 4 years. Industrial customers pay about 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Residential customers' bills have gone up 20%. And so it is time to bring that back into balance. And I'm not suggesting we stick it to industrial customers. They could still enjoy low rates. I'm just saying we need to broaden the opportunities for residential customers to lower their bills.
Great. Thank you for bringing that up, because I was really curious if there were going to be any costs associated with any of these large loads coming online, the transmission cost, or kind of what you talked about, kind of the peak and stuff. So, and I think it's really key to know. I liked that you shared the cost per kilowatt, right, for the industrials and the residential customers, because I think that was shocking to me. There's a lot of reasons behind it, and that's probably for another recording or another day, but something for us to think about too is the increase that we've seen in residential customers for probably a number of reasons, but want to make sure that we are able to kind of maintain those costs as much as possible, rather than them continuing to increase for these data centers.
Yeah. And Stephanie, you're absolutely right. Like, we could do an entire, I could talk for hours about the history of the electric system. I will spare you and your viewers and listeners that experience right now. But suffice it to say that those low rates for industrial customers do go back 100 years, and it's because low electricity prices have been used as an economic development tool. Right. And it's, again, one of the reasons why these sort of anti-energy bills floating around right now are so damaging, because we will lose a lot of businesses if those kinds of things pass. So I just want to put a finer point on this, because I want to make sure I'm not, misspeaking or setting this up to be misheard. Having low industrial rates is a really good thing for a state. We should want that. The idea is not to increase the industrial rates. The idea is to try to make sure the costs are spread fairly, and to give opportunities to residential customers to lower their bills as well. Don't make those demand response opportunities only available to large users. Let's expand the opportunity there.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. And that's perfect. Great. Well, Doug, we have had such a informative conversation. I enjoy listening to you. And it's hard for me to understand some of these terms and concepts, but you've done a great job of really breaking them down. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. And I just want to plug kind of AARP. We are one of the few organizations at the Capitol representing residential consumers. We are tracking all of the issues that were discussed today. Doug is definitely helping and serving in an advisory role to me to introduce me to this market. But please follow us if you want to stay up to date on these issues and other electricity issues that are being discussed. I encourage you to go to AARP Texas's advocacy hub at aarp.org/TX advocacy and see how you can get involved with our advocacy work. Again, it's aarp.org/TX advocacy. Doug, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to continuing to work with you through the end of session. And viewers, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks, Stephanie.